We have some explosive new information here about the Wuhan virus from China that should change the way you look at this. Now, it doesn't change the outcome. The people who have died from the Wuhan virus tragically, obviously, are still dead. Their families have still lost them. Their loss is tragic. And I believe their losses could have been preventable with some action from the WTO in China that never came. And when it did come, the information was in fact wrong and inaccurate and probably jeopardized lives and killed people. Yes, I mean every word of that. Having said that, I've said to you from the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, let me caveat this. Obviously, I am not a medical doctor, an epidemiologist, or a virologist. I'm also not stupid. I can read data. Anyone can read data. You don't need to be a medical doctor to read data. Having said that, I've insisted to you from the beginning that two things matter about this Wuhan virus before we make drastic decisions about how to handle it. What matters is how contagious is it and how lethal is it. This isn't hard. You don't need to be a medical doctor, a DO, a virologist to understand that how we should respond to this virus depends on how lethal it is and, in fact, how contagious it is. A quick example. If it's the Ebola virus and its fatality rate is somewhat of 25 to 50%, that's a really serious virus that deserves a really serious response depending on how contagious it is. Point taken. If the virus was like, say you have a continuum and you don't know about this virus yet. So you have Ebola, Hanta, all these deadly viruses on one end. On the other end, you have the standard rhinovirus for the common cold. The common cold, shockingly, probably does kill some people, but it's not very lethal. It's also highly contagious. When you know about those numbers and you have a grasp on them, you can gauge an appropriate public policy response. My beef with the public policy response from the beginning has been we engaged in draconian measures based on information we didn't have that's now being shown to be wrong. What do I mean by that? Let's go to this Axios report, which will be in the show notes today. I was trying to get away from Axios, but once in a while they'll put out some decent news stuff, even though they did some fake news stuff a couple weeks ago. Axios, this is important, really important. Hat tip to my wife, by the way, who told me this a long time ago. New data shows the first U.S. coronavirus death was earlier than thought. Folks, there have been a number of people, some in this listening audience, friends of mine, members of the Republican Party I speak to, who shall remain nameless, and others, who have suspected that this Wuhan virus was in the United States much earlier. Now, they've been suspicions. Based on what? I know down here in Florida, as I said to you on a prior show, I don't have the antibody test yet. I'm reasonably convinced I contracted this thing down at the Super Bowl. I had the dry cough. I had the fever. It was not, for me, the symptoms weren't that bad. For others, they are. For others, it results in death. Now we can confirm those suspicions that it was definitely here earlier than suspected from the Axios piece. This matters. This is data. The Santa Clara Public Health Commission in California announced Tuesday that autopsy results found a patient who died on February 6th, folks, who had the novel coronavirus. February, why does that matter? Well, it matters because the first known death from COVID-19 in the U.S. was declared on February 29th in Washington State. A second person who died in Santa Clara on February 17th was also found to have the virus. Ladies and gentlemen, if we believe the first known case of death was February 29th, and an autopsy after the death of an individual shows that this person had it and contracted it February 6th, something's not marrying up, ladies and gentlemen. So everyone who was called a kooky conspiracy theorist and a nut saying, hey, I think this thing was here earlier. We've had outbreaks and pockets of sickness in areas of California and Florida and elsewhere before the stated date of the first death. All of those people, again, by some media folks, oh, you guys are just conspiracy theorists. Now we have the evidence that we were right. That's important. You may say, well, why is it important? Ladies and gentlemen, it's important because a lot of the cases we may have attributed to deaths from flus or other things before we understood the Wuhan virus may in fact have been from the coronavirus. And Many people who were asymptomatic and recovered and thought they had a common cold may have in fact had the coronavirus. That also matters because a lot more people may have been infected than we may have been led to believe. Let's look at this Red State article, which again will be up in the show notes, bongino.com/newsletter if you'd like the show notes. Cluelessly contagious. Headline: a study reveals 32% of undiagnosed folks contracted the virus. Many were surprised they were even a carrier. From the Red State piece. Again, this is important, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll wrap this up in a mix. I got a ton of stuff to get to. Paula doesn't think I'm going to get to it all today. We're going to try. From the Red State piece. This past week in Massachusetts, the General Hospital researchers took to the streets of Chelsea for a Wuhan flu experiment. They asked passersby to take a blood test, which identifies coronavirus antibodies, meaning you had the bug. The limited study found that 1/3 of participants tested positive. They finger pricked, Joe, 200 people on April 17th and 18th, and 64 folks' immune systems had the antibodies. There was another study out of Santa Clara, that same place the Axios report was about the early contraction of disease in February before the first case on the record we had in Washington State. Did a study in Santa Clara, Joe. The estimates in Santa Clara, the infection rate based on the study they did of a random subject, a subset of the population, they thought they had about 1,000 infections in Santa Clara. They now think they had up to 48 to 81,000 coronavirus infections. That is 50 to 85 times the infection rate. That's right. Meaning what? Meaning if you thought you had 1,000 infections, just simple math, and let's say 10 people died, you have a fatality rate of 1%. If you had 85,000 infections and a fatality rate of 10, those are not the exact numbers. I'm simply suggesting to you why the math may have been wrong about how lethal this is. If you had 85,000 infections and 10 or even 50 deaths, the lethality rate, the fatality rate of this is obviously going to be far lower. It's simple math. Suggesting that the public policy response based on a fatality rate of 1% may have been grossly off.
You just heard The Dan Bongino Show. You can also get Dan's podcasts on iTunes or SoundCloud and follow Dan on Twitter 24/7 @DBongino.